Right. Well, hello, Matt. How are you?
Angela, I'm fine. I'm fine. And yourself?
I am fine as well. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me a little today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's
And
my pleasure.
thanks for being the second in our speaker series for the Spotlight on Seniors. It was a very well attended conversation for the folks who were able to go there. And today I just wanted to kind of follow up to give a taste for those who are not able to join us in person, and also maybe a reminder for the folks who had gotten to attend. But I also wanted to get some background on you. I don't know if folks know how you first got connected to the church, and also how you got interested in estate planning as a profession.
Yeah. So going back to the kind of the estate planning and how I got into that, like many like many lawyers who graduate from law school and aren't exactly certain what the heck they want to do with their life. Um, not necessarily coming from a background of lawyers. I started with a law firm and was a litigator, and I figured out that was something I didn't want to do with the rest of my life. And an opportunity came open rather early to do estate planning, and I was kind of drawn to it by the ability to help people, to do things which were, for the most part, positive. Because I'm afraid, as much as I think lawyers do wonderful, good things, um, it can be, people can come out of situations where, the lawyers don't necessarily aren't necessarily held in high esteem by one person or another.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough to get into it and took to that, and that was basically almost 39 years ago
Oh,
when I did
wow.
that. Yeah, and then I guess it was almost 17 years ago. My wife and I were a little bit dissatisfied in our faith journey, and I made the trek down to the college church. We were living in Fenton at the time, and was just amazed by both the music, the liturgy, uh, the homilies, and it just we took to it, and that's why we're here.
That's wonderful. Do you remember who was the pastor at the time you first came down?
I should.
You don't. This isn't a quiz. Don't worry about
Yeah,
it.
it was 2006,
Okay, okay.
but yeah, my memory's not going back that far, at least right now.
Fair enough,
Tonight,
fair
in the
enough.
middle of the night, I can tell you.
Okay, sounds good. Well, so give me a little taste of what you were talking about when you had what were some of the ideas that you most wanted to communicate to folks about estate planning?
Yeah, so I think there are, and this is not specific to kind of the substance of estate planning, but three things that I really wanted to get people to take away from it is that first, it's better to plan now than to plan later. Um, sometimes we don't get the opportunity to do the planning. We kind of put it off and say, well, when we're closer, but
Hmm.
maybe we don't know when that's going to be.
Right,
Not everybody gets the warning,
right, right.
so do it now rather than later. Even if you do get that warning, it can be a difficult time to do planning at a time when you're faced with so many other challenges.
Sure.
So that's one. A second is that if you don't plan, you have planned.
Hmm.
You don't make choices, you have chosen.
Hmm.
And those choices may not be choices you really wish to make.
Right.
And then the third point that I really want people to take away with is that planning is a gift. Doing the planning is a gift to your family because you are doing something that is going to make it easier for them. As I was telling people at the gathering, um, you know, really for most people, for say married couples who have children, even, the type of planning that they're doing is really for the benefit of their children. with them, if they keep everything in joint names and they have, say, powers of attorney, they don't really need to do anything else for them. And I remember telling one couple that, and they literally said, "Wow, that's interesting." And they got up and walked out. Um, now, most people, don't take that attitude. And I think most people, if they think about it, it really, really is a gift. So,
Well, so what are some of the common concerns that you find in this, and what are some ways people can avoid it, other than in general be planning and talk
sure.
to people that might have some knowledge about this.
Yeah. So I think a couple things. One of them is that when you're engaged in the planning, there's certain things that you need to know, and there's certain misconceptions I think that people have. One is that how you own your property is extremely important. And has a bearing on how your property passes. So, we talk about wills, and wills can be a very important vehicle in the estate planning process. But wills don't have any effect on property that is held in joint names,
Mm,
property that has beneficiary designations on it. And sometimes people will say, well, hey, I redid my will. And so, I don't have to check with the insurance company or on my retirement plans to change who the
mm.
beneficiary is. And it's no, that's not the case.
Wow,
Yeah,
right.
you really do. If you have beneficiary designations, which can be a wonderful way of passing property, um, you need to take care of those at the same time.
Yeah,
So, and that's again, part of this whole thing is doing things in a comprehensive way, and getting the type of advice that you need, because, as painful as it is to pay a lawyer, to do something, because, it's not like you come home with something bright and shiny. Um, but as I'll tell people, we as lawyers make more money off of people who don't plan, who don't ask our advice, than we do off of people who do. Because our job is really to try to make it, again, as easy as possible
right,
on the people who come after you.
right, right, right.
Okay.
And you talked a lot about making sure that you had, trusted people in your life that would be kind of connected in with these conversations, right? Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, so there's, various roles that people play, in your plan, and just to kind of list them out in general. Executor under your will, that's one that's fairly common. If you do a trust, which mentioned here in just a second, somebody who's going to act as trustee on the trust. Then you have guardians. If you have younger children, you need to name guardians. So in the event that the horrible thing passes or happens, that both you and your spouse pass, that you have somebody that you have picked to take care of the children. And then there's things that are really important for the individuals themselves, and that's somebody to act under a durable power of attorney or a durable power of attorney for healthcare, to
Mm,
make decisions for you when you can't.
hmm.
Oftentimes it's a spouse, but if there are no spouses, it's choosing someone who is close enough to you that is able to make decisions for you, hopefully, educated by you as to what your preferences would be, when you're unable to make those decisions. So it's, those are very important roles, that you need to fill. And then you also need to think about successors,
Mm,
alternates,
hmm.
because unfortunately the people we name may not be around, and
Right.
so
Yeah.
you need to
Yeah.
pick those other people. Yeah.
So let's talk more about trusts.
Yeah. So trusts are not for everyone.
Mhm.
They're primarily used in the context of avoiding probate. Um, Probate is not avoided by having a will.
Mm,
As I'll tell people, wills are a roadmap through probate. They're not a
mm.
detour around it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Probate is a process that takes a number of months to a year. There's some, I guess, downside in the event that a will goes through probate. Your affairs are a bit more public in that situation, um, and you have to pay lawyers,
Mhm.
to handle your estate through the probate process. Probate court fees and the state fees are not that much, honestly. It's really primarily paying lawyers for carrying you through that process. So there's a number of ways to avoid probate, one of which is owning things jointly with people, which can be great, but it can also fall flat on its face. The horror story that I tell is that somebody may have 5 kids, and one lives at home or in the home city, and mom puts everything in joint names, with their son, trusted son, and it's all great. Mom dies. Mom's intent was that trusted son would divide everything up with his siblings. Trusted son, though, looks at things and says, wow, this is a lot of money. And, I took care of mom this whole time. And you know what? This is mine and I'm not sharing it. Doesn't happen 99 times out of 100, but it can.
Right.
That's where relying on joint ownership is not necessarily the best thing to do. Beneficiary designations are another way to avoid probate. Life insurance, retirement plan benefits, all that. Um, when there is a beneficiary designation, the assets will pass outside of probate. You can even do that on a house through what's called a beneficiary deed. Um, those things are, again, very helpful. The only downside to beneficiary designations is sometimes they don't take care of contingencies. What happens if one person dies? Normally you have to go back and change the beneficiary designations, but what if people don't get around to them? And that's where having a trust is a way of avoiding probate because, and not to delve too deeply into the technical details, but it avoids probate because your assets are no longer owned by you, they're owned by a trust. Even though,
Oh, I see.
right, even though you are the
Hmm.
trustee, you
Hmm.
completely, are in charge of everything. It's for your own benefit, but because it's not literally owned by you,
Right.
it doesn't go through probate.
Gotcha.
So that's the reason for that. And then in the context of that trust, which you can also do in a will, you can provide for trusts that are helpful in other ways, which is for the benefit of, say, children who
Hmm.
are underage.
Mm.
Because if somebody inherits something when they're 15, it goes into a court supervised conservatorship. And what you can do instead is you can set up a trust that will be for their benefit, and then you can specify an appropriate age of wisdom. According to state law, it's 18, which, no offense to anybody out there who's 18. Uh,
Are you saying that 18-year-olds are not necessarily wise?
I can tell you a story about a young gentleman whose father died, and the next day he was at Plaza Motors trying to buy a Lamborghini. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah, so those
yeah,
things do happen,
yeah, yeah.
and that's one way to avoid that, and hopefully, help out the young people until they're an appropriate age.
Got it.
Yeah.
Were there particular questions that came up, or when you had the conversation at College Church? I'm sure that it's a very mixed audience. I did hear
Right.
some laughter when there was maybe, yeah, I think there was a $400,000 cutoff at one point that you mentioned, and parts of this advice does not apply to everybody.
Yeah, yeah, and I was going to mention that. So, the estate tax, which a lot of people still worry about, and I think it's almost kind of like oh, I don't know, ancestral memory,
Mm,
because the estate tax used to be a very significant issue for most families.
mm,
Right now, the the estate tax exemption is $12,920,000. And
Okay.
so a married couple can shelter almost 26 million.
Okay.
Now that may drop.
Sure.
Uh, it's possible. It's the law sunsets in 2026,
Mm,
and it'll drop down to 6.5 million. So again, still not a concern for the majority of people, but for some, absolutely.
yeah.
But back in 1976, the exemption was 60,000. And
Mm,
when I started practicing in 1984, it was 325.
mm.
So it's changed a lot through the years. Yeah.
Sure.
So, yeah. But so, if that's something that anybody has concerns about, you know, talk to a lawyer. But for a lot of people, it's not an issue anymore. Another issue I think that we talked about on that Sunday was um, how to handle funeral planning.
Mm, hmm.
And the thing I was telling people is that, unfortunately, or maybe it's fortunately, I don't know, what I do does not really have a bearing on that.
Right.
And it's wills and trusts are not a good place to do that type of planning because oftentimes people will not even see those documents until the person's affairs have been taken care of.
Right. Yeah.
Somebody may already be cremated when they wanted to be buried or buried when they wanted to be cremated by the time someone looks at the will.
Hmm.
So, what I encourage people to do is make plans, um, tell people about what they want, do the pre-need funeral arrangements if you wish. Um, it's something that you really need to speak to the people who are close to you
Yeah.
and make sure they know what you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I had a client who, for years, she every year she would redo her plan, and she would send a copy to me because she had no close relatives, so
Mm,
she wanted me to handle taking care of it, and she had the hymns, the readings, what dress she was supposed to wear, who was to officiate, what time of day, the flowers, the mass cards, everything. I mean, it was all laid out. And if most people don't go to that detail, but to the extent you want to, it's making
yeah.
sure that whomever is going to be involved in that process, that they know what your intent is.
It strikes me that one of and this isn't necessarily universal truth because it's very the cultural amnesia almost about death is very strong. But I feel like there are resources within the Catholic faith to be um, serious and sober minded and not take death but serious but not take death too seriously, if that makes any
Mhm.
sense. And I think of my own mother who is 91 and is extremely upfront about all of her wishes and will say things like, well, if I don't make it to the end of the week, this is who this piece of fabric goes to or whatever. She's always the memento mori is strong in her. And I feel like that is that's a real benefit to church gatherings as well, just to have these conversations in a safe space and let people know that it's okay to have these conversations and actually really helpful to have these conversations with the people around them.
Yeah,
Um, so it's
absolutely.
yeah. Um, and I thought of the ways that we think about our possessions too, like having sort of a loose hold on them, and also um, how we might be surprised at the actual process. So, for example, we've had a number of deaths even in the 3 years I've been here, we've had a number of deaths in the parish, and I have heard from people going through the process of grieving, but also like the all of the stuff involved with
Mm,
the process, including how long it might take to get a death certificate, even, and just so that people are prepared that it's not going to be a process that is necessarily smooth, and to be aware that there are going to be challenges like that along the way. It might be helpful to know.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, it is a process. And, when somebody passes, particularly, a non-spouse, because usually spouses know most everything about their spouse. Not always, of course,
Sure.
but when you're dealing with, a parent or a sibling or someone of that sort, and you are going through their papers and their assets, it literally is almost a detective job in a way,
Mm-hmm.
to figure out what's there,
Yeah.
what the assets are. Even when you've spoken to people about it, they don't always remember.
Sure.
Uh, you know, they may forget,
Yeah.
about things that they have.
Yeah.
And it does take longer than you might want or expect. Getting death certificates, is 2 weeks or more.
Over.
And you really can't sometimes do anything
Right.
without the death certificates. If you're going through the probate process is a minimum of 7 months.
Mm.
It's actually 6 months and 20 days, but it's a minimum of that. And you're looking at most likely a year
Yeah.
to finish that process.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't do things along the way. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean people won't have access to funds. It just means that it's not going to be over. And that's one of the things that's hard on people is having this thing hanging out there that's not resolved.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but, you know, just hang in there, go through it, and it eventually gets done.
There is light at the end of it all, right? Yeah.
Right, right. You mentioned something about things and property, which I want to throw out there, which I think is very important. And that's, we have more issues or see more issues sometimes with the little things.
Yes.
It's the tangible property than we do with money.
Right.
People may get a little upset that, Mary got more than John, money wise, but what people really get upset about is who got mom's wedding ring,
Right.
and mom and dad, sister, whomever, they can solve that generally, by providing for the disposition of their personal property through a list. And you know, it's not foolproof, and you
Mm-hmm.
might not think of everything,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a way of avoiding, some of those disputes that can come up, between people based on, the emotional attachment to things.
So by a list, you mean that in advance, someone says, this is where I want my wedding ring to go. This is where I want, and just list all of the uh, uh, most likely debatable subjects, huh?
Right, right. Even though you may not, you may not think of everything,
Gotcha.
um, but yes, I mean that's the sort of thing. And some people even, people go to great lengths with these. Sometimes they'll take photographs,
Mm-hmm.
and put a name on the photograph and have a little binder of photographs, as kind of their list, to make sure that you're looking at the right emerald ring or whatever it is. Um, and again, it's a way of making a gift, uh, to your loved ones because you are trying to anticipate and avoid issues and problems.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I think you've potentially helped somebody else out today with this conversation, as well as with your conversation live a couple of Sundays back. Thank you again for taking the time to talk with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I appreciate it. All right.
Here.
Take care. Bye bye.